Hola clase, hoy vamos a discutir Perú, quizás mi país favorito. Today we're going to discuss Peru, perhaps one of my favorite countries. Peru is mystical and magical. It is almost hard to even put it into words, the majesty of the Andes Mountains and the spirit of life that encircles you when you are there. Have you ever been so intrigued or captivated by a photo that your first thought was, I must go here? This happened to me with Machu Picchu. Years ago, I was watching Motorcycle Diaries, an incredible film about the beginnings of Che Guevara. Che eventually goes to Machu Picchu, and when this scene appears on the big screen, my heart started racing and my skin tingled all over. Alls I knew at that moment was that I had a strong urge to visit there. I didn't know why, and I also didn't know how or when I would get there. I just knew that someday I had to get there. Well, it turns out that funny feeling I had in my stomach was my intuition guiding me to a place that would always be sacred to me. It wasn't without difficulties, but if we want something bad enough, we will make it happen. I finally made my first trip to Peru in 2010. I couldn't wait to see Machu Picchu. I had waited a long 10 years to get there. After flying to the other side of the continent, there was a huge flood and the road to Machu Picchu was wiped out. I couldn't believe that after all these years of waiting to get there, I would have the misfortune of not visiting it. But Peru proved to be a fascinating place without even visiting Machu Picchu. They had other ruins and cities to explore. I was staying in Cusco, and during the last decade, a period during which the numbers of visitors have multiplied because of its position to the gateway to Machu Picchu, I quickly realized Peru had so much more to offer and was a great motivation for me to come back as soon as I could. The funny thing about life is that it directs us to where we really want to be, and it finds opportunities for us to fulfill if we are open to them. In the last 4 years, I have been to Machu Picchu 5 times. And out of 4 of those times, it was my job, and I got the privilege of taking students with me. So this is a photo with some students that I took the first time to Machu Picchu. Only one time that I went, I wasn't being paid to do it, and this is when my boyfriend at the time proposed to me on my birthday at Machu Picchu. And he said to me that if I didn't say yes, he was going to push me off the mountain anyways. So I had no choice. But anyways, like I was saying, when it goes back to my intuition, I knew that this was going to be a place that was really special to me. And this is a place that I've continued to go back to and look forward to visiting in the future with students as well. But enough about my experiences. Let's get to the main character. So the main character is Hiram Bingham. So this man is the one who brought Machu Picchu to the attention of the world. His name was Hiram Bingham. He was born in Hawaii to strict parents who spread the word of God to the natives of Hawaii. Hiram was an only child, and the only book he was allowed to read was the Bible. He had few playmates and spent much of his time in the great outdoors exploring and escaping his strict parents. Soon enough, Hiram saved enough money to travel, and he found himself in California. Let's just say his mind was blown. He realized how sheltered he had been and wanted to explore. Of course, his parents wanted him to be a missionary, just like his father and grandfather, but Hiram had other ambitions. He wanted to be a professor, and ultimately, he wanted to be an explorer. Hiram eventually was accepted to Yale University as a student, where he served his undergrad and eventually went on to Harvard for his postgraduate work. So Yale and Harvard were the two schools that he spent much of his years researching. The thing about Hiram is that he never really felt accepted. He came from a long line of missionaries with not too much money to his name. Hiram felt excluded, at times from his classmates, as many of them were part of the Good Old Boys Club and came from families with big money. He wanted to fit in, but it was obvious to his classmates that he was not truly one of them. So he knew that once he became a great explorer, he was he was meant to be, he would be welcomed with open arms into this high society. So this helped fuel his motivations. Eventually, some good luck came Hiram's way. So Hiram fell madly in love with a shy, sheltered young woman named Alfreda Mitchell. To his parents' disapproval, he eventually marries Alfreda and did not become a missionary. Marrying Alfreda was a great advantage to Hiram. Not only did they get along well, Alfreda was the heir to Tiffany diamonds. This would put Hiram in a completely different social class and give him opportunities he did not have before. After their marriage, Bingham went on to become a history lecturer at Yale University. He was the first professor of Latin American history in the United States. This was around 1907. So before this, only U.S. and European history was taught. So this gave Hiram the opportunity to finally explore and see the world and maybe become that great explorer that he always wanted to be. So one of his summer, in 1908, excuse me, it should be 1909, he headed to a conference. So if you can only imagine going to a conference on the other side of the continent. So imagine how far you would have to travel by boat to even get here. So as he was crossing through here, he learned about a 400-year-old unsolved mystery that would motivate his ambitions even more so. So at this conference, he had heard about the Spanish conquistadors and how they invaded in the 16th century. A group of Incas withdrew to a hidden city high in Peru's impenetrable cloud forests, carrying with them the sacred treasures of their empire. This city and its inhabitants had vanished so long ago that, as for the most serious scholars were concerned, legends of its existence were about as credible as talks of Atlantis. Hiram knew then that this was his opportunity to become a great explorer that he always wanted to be. His mission would be to find the so-called lost city. So this was an opportunity for him. Like I said, he always wanted to be this great explorer, and so he looked up to Magellan and Jacques Cartier and Marco Polo, and he always really appreciated the work that they did. And so as you can see, this is Hiram in Peru setting up. And going on some of his expeditions. So does this sound familiar to anybody? A Yale professor who during the summers goes to search for lost cities in South America? If you're thinking Indiana Jones, you're correct. Hiram Bingham was the inspiration for Indiana Jones. So here you have the crystal skull, but it's the same concept of the professor going to search for gold in the jungle in different ruins. So that is an interesting piece of information. So what he has to do, Hiram returns back to Yale and he explains to them about this lost city. And Yale is a little bit iffy about this whole thing. Not only is he the first Latin American professor, which they were really iffy about to begin with, they weren't sure how they were going to be able to fund this expedition and if this lost city really did exist. So Hiram decides to go ahead with his plans anyways, and he assembles a very strong team of workers. He gets a map and routes out the entire expedition so that he can show it to Yale University. But most importantly, begs his wife to give him money he needs to complete the mission. And this is why it's so important that she's the heir to Tiffany Diamonds, because she has a way to be able to fund his projects. So after she finally gets on board, after much convincing with Alfreda, she agrees. The reason it was a lot of convincing is that Hiram and Alfreda had 7 children. And so as she's left home to care for these children, he's out and about in Peru on these expeditions. And so after the convincing of Alfreda, Yale and National Geographic jump on board and supply him with the most up-to-date equipment. So now he has a lot of power for him. He has a lot of money and he has everything that he needs to be able to go and find this lost city. So he heads back down to Peru. And so he spent the next couple days trekking through difficult terrain. And with his crew, they take a break in Ollantaytambo. So Hiram and his crew head to Peru to search for the lost city. As Hiram is following his route, he stops in Ollantaytambo for a day's rest. During this time, he meets some gentlemen who tell him there's a ruin at the top of the mountain nearby and they would like to take him to see it. Now, mind you, this was not what Hiram was looking for. Skeptical, he sent his crew ahead to stay on pace, and he stayed behind with the locals. So he spent the next couple days trekking through difficult terrain infested with snakes, spiders, and mountain lions. And only imagine it was straight up. And this is an actual picture. This used to be in black and white, but they've put it into color for us to see. How difficult this terrain would have been. It's completely overgrown, and on top of it, like I said, lots of snakes, spiders, and mountain lions. But imagine, this isn't the lost city that he's looking for. So as he gets to the top, okay, he sees this amazing view. And so we're going to watch this video so you can have a better idea of what he might have been taking in at the time. So just to give you an idea, Machu Picchu sits so high in the sky, at times clouds come in and completely cover up the city. And so that's why it was lost for so long. Perhaps maybe the Spanish weren't able to find it. So this is a really interesting story that we're not going to get into specifically for today's lessons. But of how they built Machu Picchu, you have to remember they didn't have any tools or horses. All they had was alpacas, and we'll get into that as we go further. So imagine, can you imagine not looking for this place and then end up, discovering it? Or let me just say rediscovering, because the locals knew about Machu Picchu, but the world didn't know about Machu Picchu. And so with that being said, keep in mind that Hiram Bingham didn't discover it per se, but he did make it known to the world. He made it a discovery for the world to be able to see what this magnificent ruin was in Peru. And so the discovery is monumental in so many ways. So can you imagine? Also, he is the first explorer ever to take a photo of something as he's discovering it. And so obviously this made for an incredible National Geographic. And when he discovered it too, it was completely overgrown with lots of jungle. So for 400 years, nobody had been living there. So it was completely overgrown, though most of it intact. And so a lot of work had to be done in the next couple years undoing it and trying to make it a little bit more visible so that you could walk around. And in those years, Hiram Bingham became that great explorer that he wanted to be. He eventually was on one of our stamps, and I went to Machu Picchu on the 100-year anniversary, and so he has his name up at Machu Picchu. I mean, the locals speak of him very highly, and there's different stories you can tell about Hiram, whether they're positive or negative, but he did eventually make this happen for him. But while he was there, he did do a lot of collecting of artifacts and discovering of artifacts. You have to keep in mind, when the Incans were there, it was at its height. And I'll talk about the Incas in our next lesson, our next discussion. But Hiram eventually brought around 700 artifacts back home. And these artifacts, at the time, Peru said that he could take them. And even till this day, Yale and Peru are in the court systems suing each other for who really should have these objects. So apparently he took 700. Yale can only account for about 400 artifacts, so there might be some that are floating around out there. Hence the ideas of like Indiana Jones and how maybe some have gone into the jungle with other people. So with that being said, that's still up in the air. But just to give you an idea about the Incans, so the Incans they did sacrifices, but they didn't do brutal sacrifices per se. So basically, this is an actual mummy that was found just a couple of years ago in Peru that's perfectly preserved. So Luluyaco is a 15-year-old girl sacrificed during the Inca Empire for both purposes of religious rite and social control. She was chosen a year prior to her death, fed a ritualistic diet for an approximate 12 months to make her gain weight, then was drugged and left on the shrine at Volcano Luluyaco, where she was left to die of exposure. For 500 years, her body has been preserved at 82 feet. She is considered to be the best preserved Andean mummy ever uncovered. So with that being said, they didn't do brutal sacrifices where they would rip your heart out of the chest, but they did make you take hallucinogenic drugs and freeze it at the top of a mountain. So these are some of the really important things that people are still trying to discover. So you have to remember the Incans have no written history. So it is really left to the imagination how they were able to build this 500 years ago without the tools they have. And the rocks that are here didn't come from here. They came from someplace else. And so how were they able? So with that in mind, the Incans only ruled for 100 years. And so during this time, not only did they build Machu Picchu, they covered over 2,500 miles of land and conquered numerous different tribes and also built other ruins. So how are they able to do that in a 100-year time span and do things? For example, these fountains at Machu Picchu still function today. And we'll get into this conversation more when I show you other architectural work in our next discussion. But they have made things so solid that they do not even fall during earthquakes. So for example, there's been 3 or 4 different earthquakes, and the ruins that the Peruvians have built, the Incans have built, still stand today and have withstood numerous different natural disasters. So how are they able to make something so incredible so long ago without the information that we have today? So at its height, Machu Picchu, we don't still know what Machu Picchu was. Was it a place for just the emperors? Was there only women found there? So only women's bones were found there. So were only women's bones found there because all the men had fled to go to war? And so we're really left to our imagination about what this place was. But in its heyday, it was a paradise. It had macaws everywhere, avocados, you would have gold, everything was gold plated with turquoise all surrounding the different city. And so it's so curious about how they built this, why they had it, and you're just really basically left to your imagination. And many of these ruins right here would have had thatched roofs, and that would give you a better idea of how the city functioned. And obviously, like I said before, there's alpacas and llamas, and that was a huge way they could transport things. But keep in mind, they can only carry up to 70 pounds. So how are they able to do that? How are they able to do all of this? So this is just the inside, so you can see how perfectly these fit together. And so these are perfectly cut, and they didn't have any tools to do this. So how are they able to do it without, I don't know. It's just really interesting. So here too, if you didn't know this, guinea pig is a delicacy in Peru. And so even today, guinea pig is eaten, and this is what a lot of the Incans ate for many, many years was the guinea pig. So to give you an idea of where Machu Picchu is, if you can see these mountains, here down here is the train tracks, and then deep in these mountains in here is Machu Picchu. And so that's why it was so hard to find. There really were no pathways into it, and actually still today there are no roads that can take you to Machu Picchu. There's only two ways that you can get to Machu Picchu. One is by train, and the other is by foot. So with that being said, you would really have to plan ahead of time depending on which way you'd want to take. The road up to Machu Picchu looks just like this. This is actually the road. And so it takes at least 15 minutes just by bus to get to the top of this mountain. That's how high it is up in the sky. So why did the Incans pick to build here? That's just another thought to think about as well. And I will say I've been on this bus ride numerous times to the top, and I don't have a queasy stomach, and this bus ride makes me a little queasy almost every single time. So, like I said, there's only two ways you can get to Machu Picchu, but the most popular way is the Hiram Bingham train, obviously named after the explorer Hiram Bingham. And this is you have to go to Ollantaytambo first, and from Ollantaytambo you can take the train to Aguas Calientes, and that's about a 2-hour train ride. So Machu Picchu is one of the most visited monuments in the world. So just giving you an idea, usually most of the visitors come during the summer months. The summer months are summer months, not their summer months. So you have to remember too that Peru is on the other side of the equator. So July, August, and June, September are their winter months. So it can be a little bit chillier and dicier with the weather there. But they get upwards to 3,000 tourists per day for much of the year. So this supplies a lot of money for Peru, and it hasn't always been like this. So really in the last decade, I would say there's been a huge boom to their tourism. In the 90s, they had some terrorism issues, and so there was a ban to travel there, so not many people went there, and that has changed a lot through the years, and now it has become the most visited monument in the world. But you can see why if you can see this architecture. So how did they make this? This is perfectly cut, right? And there's nothing in between to put these together. So how are they able to do this? And these are just different walkways and paths through Machu Picchu, as you can see out these windows, what you'd be looking at if you actually lived there. So like I said, alpacas and llamas are a really big part of the Incan traditions. Um, and they can carry up to 80 pounds. So it depends on, um, women usually took care of the livestock as well. And many of the paths leading up to Machu Picchu are really precarious. So with that being said, there's some hikes that you can take in and around Machu Picchu that are so steep that if you make one wrong move, and actually if you watch the videos that I posted from my last 2 trips I've taken with students, I wore my GoPro for the one of them. If you literally take one wrong step, you're going to fall to your death. And so it's very precarious. And that's what the Incans were well known for, is how well their paths were made as well, so that they could get to these ruins very, very quickly. But it's not without much danger. So as you can see here, this is a perfect example of how rigid some of their pathways are and how much you'd have to pay attention. This is an old Incan bridge that is the back entrance to Machu Picchu. It is not used anymore, obviously, because it's very dangerous, but this will give you a good idea. So here's the bridge, and actually there's still some steps right here, but then it goes straight down thousands and thousands of feet. But this was the back entryway into Machu Picchu. So this was just an introduction about Hiram Bingham and how Machu Picchu was discovered. And the next couple discussions we'll be discussing a little bit more about Incan culture and Peruvian culture in general, and also the mysterious ways that the Incans have left behind. I hope you guys have a great day and you look at those highlight videos of my students in at Machu Picchu from the last past 2 years. And that que tenga buen día. Have a great day. Ciao.